You're listening to From the Chair, and I'm your host, Mike Hamilton. Join us each episode as we talk to athletic directors from across America. We're going to talk about topics like leadership, career development, issues of the day, and I can promise you we're going to have some fun along the way too. So sit back, listen in, and let's dive in. Let's go. All right, welcome into today's episode. My guest today is Scott Dolson, who is the Director of Athletics at Indiana University. Scott, I really appreciate you joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mike. Really look forward to talking to you.
Well, you know, I can't believe after all these years, you and I have not had more opportunity to interact. And so this will be a sort of a get to know you session. And I know along the way, we're going to share some information for those who are listening that'll be very informative to folks. So, as we talked off the air, I love your story. I think that, obviously you've had a long and significant history there in Bloomington. And I want to have you have the chance to share from those experiences. And so we're going to jump right in. I found it interesting that, along the way, different people cross our paths, and they are a lot of times they can have an effect on our career ultimately by this interaction. And I know you had a friendship very early in life with Delray Brooks, and you also had a sister, I believe, that was going to go to Indiana. And if I'm not mistaken, I would say that one of your interactions with Delray, as it relates to, I think maybe moving your sister into school, maybe ended up being the genesis of your eventual career at IU, and then even I would say extrapolate it further to being athletic director today. And so if you don't mind, maybe share a little bit about that story as to how you got your introduction to Indiana basketball, I guess.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mike. And you're exactly right in terms of, people come into your life or come in and out in opportune times. And Delray was really a person that, for me, I grew up a huge IU fan. My grandfather came to school here and stayed for a year and couldn't afford to stay, but he was a huge IU person. And so for my sister and I, he talked about IU a ton. And particularly as Coach Knight started to get things going in the early 70s, he really just fell in love with IU basketball. And so as a youngster, in 1976, I was 9 years old. And I thought, my dream, like a lot of young boys in the state at that time, and even girls probably fell in love with basketball, but I wanted to play for Coach Knight and dreamed about that. Unfortunately, as time went on, I had a talent problem and wasn't going to, you could realize at some point you're not going to make that. But my best friend, just, again, people come into your lives, Delray Brooks and I really struck up a really great friendship, and he goes on to become the number one high school player in the country. And actually, he was on his visit here to IU. He had dreamed about going to play for UCLA, actually. And grew up a huge UCLA fan. I knew he was going to visit here. I didn't know whether he was going to come here or not. I was always going to come here because of my grandfather. But Delray ended up calling me from his visit, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to commit to play for Coach Knight tomorrow. You and I could be roommates." And he said, "You should think about becoming a manager." And I never even thought about that. And he suggested it because Steve Alford, who was on the team at the time, his roommate was a manager. And he said, "You love IU basketball more than anybody I know. I think you'd enjoy it, and you work and practice and blah, blah, blah." And so I said, "That's great." Well, fast forward, we came to move my sister in. So this is the right before our senior in high school, her freshman year. And Delray visited with Coach Knight. We kind of came into Simon Scott Assembly Hall and saw Coach Knight at that point, and he kind of grabbed me then. And Coach Knight said, "So I hear you want to be a manager," and made a comment like, that I'm tougher on the managers than I am sometimes the players. And I kind of laughed. And that was really the genesis of me becoming a manager. And Delray, if it weren't for him making that suggestion and getting me involved, there's no way that I would really ever even thought of it. And it just ironically, Delray ends up transferring halfway through our sophomore year to Providence College to play for Coach Pitino there. And then my junior year, we won the national championship. I'm there in New Orleans with IU. He's there with Providence. They got beat by Syracuse in the first game of the Final Four. We beat UNLV and then subsequently beat Syracuse in the championship. So it just was, again, Delray was just incredibly great to me. Still friends to this day, and really appreciate the opportunity he gave me by bringing the manager opportunity to the forefront.
Yeah, you never know who's going to cross your path, right? Hey,
right.
So a couple things on the manager role. First is, I guess I should ask, Coach Knight's comment about I'm going to be tougher on the managers than I am on the players. First question is, was that true?
No, I don't think it was. It was. Let's put it like this: it was tough. I think it was probably tougher from the the workload aspect in terms of a lot of responsibility at a young age. And back then, I sound old when I say this, but managers made a lot of the arrangements for road trips, did a lot of things that maybe a director of operations does now, because there wasn't a director of operations. Really, it was our Tim Garl, our trainer, and the managers who took care of everything. So, I think from a toughness standpoint, it was really a lot of responsibility. Now the players had it tough because they had the physical part of practicing and the pressure of certainly being in front of the crowds, the expectations. But in terms of just the demands of a manager, it was hard. But for me, it prepared me. I rely on that every day. The leadership attributes I learned while being a manager and the work ethic and how to prepare. I just can't imagine being anywhere close to being ready for an opportunity in a leadership position in athletics if I hadn't had that opportunity as a student under Coach Knight.
Now let's unpack that for just a minute, if you don't mind. I do think I'm thinking back on the podcasts that I've done in the past over the last year or so, and I don't think that I've talked extensively. Not to say that somebody else I've visited with hasn't been a manager before, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
think I've actually unpacked that very much. And I can see absolutely from being around those who have been managers for sports teams at the collegiate level why you allude to some of the things you allude to as it relates to leadership development. I mean, the number of hours you have to put in preparation and the expectations that come with that, in addition to obviously fulfilling your academic career, it's significant. It's at least as significant in many ways as being a student athlete. What are the lessons that you learned, if you can share maybe something specific from being a manager at a place like IU that you feel like were formative in becoming who you become as a leader?
Well, for me, in addition to just learning how to work hard and budget your time and be accountable, all those things, for me, it was really the first time that as I matriculated through the program and got more and more responsibility, that I had really people underneath me. I had the younger managers underneath me that I had to direct and assign duties to and manage. And so in terms of a true management experience, by the time I was a senior, you've got 10, 11, 12 managers underneath you that all have a great deal of responsibility. And for me to lead that team and to, again, lay out their responsibilities and hold them accountable, and really with such a great deal of responsibility, and me reporting up through ultimately to Coach Knight, trying to make certain we were managing the program the way he wanted to, was a big responsibility. But the other piece, Mike, that I think that for me that I didn't realize at the time, but benefited me a great deal as I ended up in athletic administration, was really learning what a successful program, how a successful program is organized. And it was just very fortunate that I was a part of such a successful program that was successful before I got there, and then was still thriving as I was a manager and winning a national championship. And watching Coach Knight, how he managed the program, what his recruiting philosophies were at that time, how he developed the players, what he did in terms of his winning strategies, and then also how he developed leaders and just built a program rather than just a team. And for me, and actually to be totally transparent with you, when I interviewed to be the athletic director here, that was part of my vision for athletics, is how do we manage our programs. And I think having a vision for each program and a championship plan and the philosophy for each coach in the program, how they set that out, for me was something that was really important in my role. And again, I developed that by learning under Coach Knight how he organized his programs, because I think that's how you establish a winning program, is to truly have a vision for all those areas. And then me as athletic director, how I can hold a coach accountable is to really understand clearly what their plan is, because I don't know how I could have a annual review with a coach other than just seeing the wins and losses if I really don't understand what their vision and their plan is to build the program. And that all was developed as a manager, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff, man. So you mentioned now a couple different times the national championship and the 86-87 squad. Obviously, Steve Alford was on that team, Callaway, Keith Smart. Keith had a couple of big shots against Syracuse, and we were referencing that just a moment ago. In every it takes a lot to come together to win a national championship, particularly when you're talking about the NCAA tournament, which I think is the greatest sports event in the world. You've got to have the right bounce at the right time, the right place, those kinds of things. And that team won a couple of games that were in the balance, until the very end, but they pulled it off. Now it was a team that was successful all year long, right? I mean, I think it came in as a maybe even one seed in the tournament, but
Mhm.
you get down to the finals and they hit a couple shots and they pull it out. A lot of times there's personalities involved that are extra special from a leadership standpoint or performance standpoint. You've got coaches and calling the right plays at the right time. You got the right bounce of the ball. You got a lot of different factors. What made that team? Because that team was not loaded with a bunch of NBA guys, right?
Mhm.
What
Mhm.
made that team what they were and led ultimately to a national championship? Seeing it from the inside.
That's a great question, Mike. And in my opinion, it was clearly the leadership of the team. And in fact, during my tenure as a manager, my 4 years, that was I would say in my estimation maybe the third most talented team. Believe me, it had some talent and obviously was talented enough to win it at the highest levels. But the leadership on that team truly set the tone for the team and to really make certain that they came together, and it's like putting a puzzle together. The pieces just all fit, and they really were dedicated to doing what it took to win. And that sounds so corny and basic, and most teams want to do what they want to do to win or have to do to win, but they truly, through our seniors who were Steve Alford and Todd Meyer and Daryl Thomas, really led that team and brought them together, and they prepared the same for every game throughout that season, whether it was the championship game of the Indiana Classic here or the NCAA championship game. And for me to watch that develop over time, you need some luck along the way. You need some things to go your way, but it really is it's a fine line between winning that national championship and getting beat in the first round of the tournament, which 2 of my 3 years we lost in the first round. My sophomore and my senior years. But that junior year, it just all came together. And to me, the distinguishing factor for sure was the leadership on the team, how they prepared for games, and really just were focused on attacking that game plan every game for sure.
So that's been, gosh, I don't know, 25 years ago now, right? Does that
Longer,
team,
longer 30, 35,
35 years? Yeah. Bad
35.
math, man. Yeah, a bad math. Thanks for covering me on that.
Yeah.
Does that team still have a bond, a relationship today?
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Very close. Unfortunately, we lost Daryl Thomas about 4 years ago, I want to say. And Daryl was a huge loss for the team. But that's a team that the bond will just never be broken, and it's really really close and it's tight, and again it's led by Steve and Todd and the senior leadership. But whether you were a manager or you were a player on that team or a coach, it's a very very close knit group. And that's one of the things that I talk about winning here, Mike, to all of our programs, is that sometimes when you talk about winning, maybe the student athletes think that you're saying that because you just want the school to win, or maybe I'm judged or the coaches are judged on how our programs win. But for me, it's really about the student athlete experience. And I know you can tell me the same thing, I'm sure, with all your experience. But in our exit interviews with student athletes, the student athletes who have competed at a high level and had a chance to win and compete for Big Ten championships or national championships and really rally together, those experiences of those student athletes are really good. The ones that have played for mediocre programs who maybe never competed at a high level tend to be the student athletes who just don't have the greatest experience here. And so, maybe again, that's not rocket science, but that's why we talk about it. We expect to win. We put together plans to win because I think it really enhances the overall student athlete experience, just like we want to do it academically and socially. But winning is a part of that. And so we try to work hard at that as well.
Leadership leads, right? And I'll tell you, the 1951 national championship team at Tennessee, for the longest time, um, first of all, they stayed together collectively throughout their entire lives
Mm-hmm.
post football. Many success stories from the business perspective among that group, but also the way that they came back to their university and played a role in leadership and thought was impressive. And I'm not saying that happens with every national championship team or championship team, but it's interesting dynamic to watch from those who win at a high level and bring home championships. Usually there's something special there on those groups, right? So
Totally agree.
um,
Yeah, totally agree.
yeah. So look, we can't talk about Indiana basketball without talking about Coach Knight, and you've talked about him already a little bit, and obviously you were around him and worked with him for some time. One of the icons of the game from a coaching perspective, and he's not short on opinions, and others are probably not short on opinions of him in many ways. But the thing you cannot contest is he had the ability to get the most out of his teams, and he won at a very, very high level, and really attained a legendary status. Right. So
Mhm.
your your relationship with him as you went through your role as manager and then post grad, what did you observe from Coach Knight that was a separator as it relates to his success?
Yeah, Coach Knight was, again, I would not have had certainly this opportunity, or really an opportunity to work in athletics like I have, if it weren't for my opportunity to work for him and be a manager, and really just watching him early on. One of the things that I did, and I don't know why I did this, to be honest with you, Mike, I just kind of, maybe I was just intrigued by his success, because I always, and I've done that a lot. You look at people who are successful, and for me, I like ask questions just in my head even sometimes. What separated them? Why were they so successful? Why? And so as a manager, as I watched Coach Knight, what made him to reach that plateau, that level that very few reach? And for me, watching him, it was always impressive. It impressed me that he brought in other, and it surprised me too, I should say, but he brought in other coaches that were very successful. A lot of them were retired at the time, but Pete Newell from California was a legendary friend of Coach Knight's, or Henry Iba, or Everett Dean, who was a longtime coach here. And I remember as a manager watching him sit on the side of the court, maybe after practice, and pick their brains on what they saw, and just talk basketball. And I remember thinking, because when I came here as manager, he had already won 2 national championships, and he'd already coached the Olympic team to a gold medal. That was the summer before my freshman year. But I always thought to myself, here's a guy or a coach that already had achieved all that. And I thought maybe he knew kind of all there was to know because he was so successful, but he was really listening intently. And I think what he did was really gather information from people and then put that into his plan. But he was a listener. And so for me as a leader, that's something that I really took away. It just struck me that you never really ever stop learning. And I just think it was a key thing, because I think his preparation, his vision for the game, his development of the motion offense, and his man-to-man defense, all of that came together. Certainly there were his own concepts, but it was through collaborating and listening and paying attention. And so I think in my career, that's one of the things that I've tried to do is, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, and I don't think I am, and I don't think I've invented how to administer college athletics at all. But I try to, starting at the Big Ten Conference, we've got some incredible ADs in the Big Ten, and all 13 of them. And I guarantee you that I learn something from them all the time, just in our meetings, and pay attention to who's successful here and what's worked at this school. And maybe because I've only been here, Mike, I'm also a little paranoid about that, is you can be labeled as maybe I'm just stuck in the Indiana way. But I've been
Yeah.
paranoid about that because I think, and back to my Coach Knight days, what I'm paranoid about is making certain that I'm looking around at what's going on around the country and around the Big Ten, and learning from people who are really smart, and then adapting that to what we can do here and what fits here in Indiana.
You got to always be in learning mode, man. I tell you, one of the things I
Yeah.
did that was so helpful, and you and I can talk about this, offline at some point. But I had a group of fellow athletic directors that we went away for 3 days every summer. There were, I think, 6 of us or 7 of us, and we sort of closed the door and just had conversations, because they experienced many of the things that I was experiencing and vice versa. And we were in an environment where, you can't talk to a lot of people about that where they understand it. But yet these were, cohorts who understood it at some level, and we're all competitive, right? But we had that place to go to continue to build. And at the time, remembering, I talked to you earlier, I was at Tennessee 19 years. So in some ways, I was sensitive to what you're saying. You want to make sure
Mhm.
that you're expanding your knowledge base and hearing other ideas. So that's all really, really good information. I want to ask you one more question about Coach Knight, and then we're going to move
Sure.
to a couple other subject lines on your current role, in your current time at IU. At Tennessee, we had a situation where we had 3 or 4, I'll call it iconic names, who became estranged from the program. Johnny Majors, obviously, when he was fired in 1992 and went to Pittsburgh, but yet he was a native son. His family was legendary in this state, and he coached and was a Heisman runner-up, et cetera. Became estranged for a while. Ernie Grunfeld and Bernard King, student athletes that were they were the Ernie and Bernie show in the mid '70s. Ray Mears, who developed Big Orange Country and was a coach that was significant in Tennessee's basketball history, somewhat estranged. We really made a concerted effort to re-engage those people. And look, there were hurdles that we had to jump through to get there, but we got there in every instance, ultimately got there. And it would be disingenuous to say that their relationship was the best it's ever been afterwards, but it certainly was better than it had been in a long, long, long time. Right. And so very high profile re-engagement of Coach Knight. A couple of years ago, you were very much involved in that. Maybe just walk us through, how that transpired and maybe your reflection on it.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that, because it really was one of the more emotional and rewarding days probably of my career, not only because I thought it was important, or we thought it was important, that Coach Knight felt welcomed and appreciated by the fans and was able to come back, and it was important from a fan perspective. There was such a division over the years, and former players as well, that it was just time to come together, and it had to be the right time. And my predecessor, Fred Glass, did a great job of always making sure that Coach Knight knew he was welcome, but we weren't going to push the fact until if and when it would ever be right for him. And we started to get a feel that it was, he was moving back to Bloomington, and it really ended up, the greatest thing that I think we did was really turn it over to the former players. And Quinn Buckner, obviously one of his greatest all-time players, and Randy Whitman as well, another All-American. Those two really helped. We kind of formed a small secret working group with Randy and Quinn leading the way, and then Bob Hamill, longtime sports writer of ours, and Dr. Larry Rink, who longtime physician in the community and in the athletic department, who was great friends with Coach Knight, who we all just worked together, and a staff member of ours named Katie Bates, and really just worked to put together what could be the most comfortable plan based on what Coach Knight wanted. And it just really came together great. And the former players were awesome. And Pat Knight, Coach's youngest son, who played for us as well, who, I helped babysit when I was a basketball manager. He was very instrumental as well in making it all happen. And that day, to me, was one of the most incredible days. I'll never forget Coach Knight walking in, and we had a reception just with his former players in our practice facility, Cook Hall, and really stayed in there until that halftime ceremony happened. But when Coach Knight came in, we walked him into the locker room back in Cook Hall, and the team was waiting there for him, the current team. And it was one of the most incredible moments standing in that locker room with Coach Knight, and he was addressing our current team, and I just couldn't believe it was happening. Some almost 20 years later after he was let go here. So it could have been better. And just now the fact that Coach Woodson's here is part of, leading our program back. And, you do feel like it's come together, but that bringing Coach Knight back was really, really important. And I could have been happier for our fans as well. There were people crying all over the arena. Yeah. And I just remember talking to people afterwards. It was about as emotional a day as I could ever imagine here at IU.
That's a fantastic story, and we need to make sure that we do what we can to keep legends involved for sure. Hey, so look, I'll say we talked about Fred Glass being in the role prior to you for 10 years. What some may not know is that you were a candidate for the job when he was selected as an athletic director, and I think that it speaks to both of you and your character that many times if you're a candidate for the job and you don't get the job, then you either decide, hey, I'm going to do something else, or maybe the new person comes in and they don't want you to be there because of the fact that you sought the job. You obviously set your ego aside. You worked with Fred for 10 years, and by all measures, from the outside looking in, it was a seamless working environment. He likewise recognized in you someone who was very talented and who had extensive knowledge at IU, but also extensive relationships. Maybe just share a little bit about your working relationship with Fred over those last 10 years before becoming athletic director.
Yeah, I was really, really fortunate that Fred got the job when he did, because I couldn't have had a better situation, to be honest with you, a better mentor, a better friend. And what happened is interesting because as I interviewed for the job as an internal candidate, when Fred ended up getting the job, I at the beginning, it was one of those situations where I threw my name in the hat and talked to the selection committee. And then as I advanced, because particularly looking at hindsight, I wasn't really ready at that time. I think I could have done it, but I certainly wasn't the best choice, I think, at that time. But as I went along in the interviews, you start to gain momentum and you start thinking like, hey, maybe I can get this. And then I was a finalist and Fred got it. Certainly any competitor at all would be a little disappointed. But right away when I met Fred, it was just kind of one of those situations where it felt like we were old friends. And literally it was his first day on the job. I met at the press conference, but really didn't talk to him. But his first day on the job, we just sat down and, to his credit, which I really appreciated, he'd reached out to me and we sat down and again, we felt like we were high school buddies and knew each other for a long time. And some of maybe as you said, the relationships and maybe some of my strengths having been here, I could really help him. And at the same time, some of his experience in leadership and things that I needed to learn to advance my career, I could get from him. And we just came together and formed a team. And, I can't, underscore enough how much responsibility he gave me and how much he helped me develop. So to the point that when he did end up stepping away, at that time when I interviewed for the job, and I didn't know whether I'd get it or not, I felt like I had to go into it almost but as an underdog, because I think when you're an internal candidate, sometimes people think it's an advantage, but I looked at it as a little bit of disadvantage because people look at you in that role and you have to almost prove yourself as a different, and you did that, Mike, when you became the AD at Tennessee, you got to sort of portray yourself in a whole different role. But I felt really, really confident because of all I developed under Fred and where we were as a department. I felt like I was the right person at the right time. I just needed to make certain I could convey that and convey a vision to the search committee and ultimately the president to be able to have that opportunity. And fortunately I was able to, but again, everything I learned under Fred and the opportunity to work for him was invaluable. And there's no way I would be here if it weren't for that, for sure.
So you get the AD job a couple of years ago in the middle of a pandemic. We've had a million different things that have happened on the landscape over the last couple of years, which we could do a podcast on that alone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to talk about a different subject that we could also do a separate podcast on, and that is how do you protect an iconic brand? So IU basketball is an iconic brand, and what you do want to do is you want to recognize the history and significance of the brand and honor that in every way possible and learn from all the great things that you've done. But you also want to make sure that you protect the brand in the sense that you want the brand to continue to grow and have the kind of success for IU, for the residents of the state of Indiana and the many thousands of alumni that follow the brand. That's a tall task. It's an important task. And as athletic director, you're on the front of that in many, many ways. How do you protect the IU Hoosier basketball brand?
I love that question because it's really tricky because particularly having been here a long time and growing up in the state of Indiana, like I said earlier, being a fan, we won the undefeated 76 championship when I was 9 years old. And that brand was just instilled in me as a youngster. So how do we, and this is the tricky part, and I'll tell you how I think about it in a second, but how do you make certain you honor the past, build on, as you said, that tradition of excellence and what the program stood for, but doing it looking forward? Because the reality is times have changed, the game has changed, the student athletes have changed, and so how can you adapt the brand, but keep it the same feel that you had looking back? And so obviously that's the challenge. And for me, one of the things that was really important, because one of the first coaching change I made as athletic director was making a change in our head basketball coach. And I had a great relationship with Archie Miller. I have nothing but unbelievable things to say about Archie. And people would probably say, yeah, but you made a change. Well, the reality is that the program just needed sometimes even great coaches don't work at schools. I think Archie's a great coach. It just didn't work. And we needed a change. And part of in making that change, what I thought was important before we selected the next head coach was really to do just what you said, is to lay out a vision for the program based on where we want the program to go and building on the past. And really listed, I put together a document, and our graphic design staff was incredible. We put together a vision for the program in like 2 days that really listed things that were really important to us in player development, things I talked about earlier, what's important to us from a recruiting standpoint, how we want to play. And it's really establishing that identity built on tradition and what we've done in the past, but with a vision for the future. And then we went out and searched for the right coach. And really what happened with Coach Woodson was, and I talked to a lot of people and all around the country and interviewed several candidates, but to us and to me, he was the perfect bridge that kind of understood the brand and what Indiana basketball is all about. But he also blended, because particularly his experience in the NBA and staying involved with basketball as long as he has, kind of where the game was going. And so how to bridge that gap between the past and the future, but keeping that same brand and that tradition of how we do things here. So, that was ultimately the plan to do that. And you have to have the right people who believe in what Indiana basketball or whatever the brand you're trying to protect stands for. And I'm excited about our future because of that vision. And again, it's kind of what I talked about earlier with Coach Knight. If you've got a plan, at least you're working towards something and you can make adjustments where you need to. And the plan is to build on that brand.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's finish with football. You had a fun run in 2020 during the COVID season, but I would say many people across America found themselves pulling for Indiana football. You were a fun team to watch. You're pulling upsets, making a run. What did you see from that particular squad that tells you that Indiana football can have sustainable success in football?
Yeah, it all starts with people. And for me, starting with Tom Allen as our head coach, just like I was talking about with basketball, you've got to know who you are, what your plan is, what your vision is. And he truly is, and you see him on TV, and you may sometimes find this hard to believe because you might think Tom Allen is he's just so enthusiastic. Is he like that all the time, or is that authentic? And when you're around him, he truly cares. He's really authentic. He's got a vision for the program. It's funny when he came here, and we laugh about this now. He's got this. His mantra is LEO, love each other, and he wants the players to really embrace that and embrace being a part of a team and develop that. And so, I think for Indiana football, again, having a coach who has a vision and has a plan and works that plan and is authentic. And then as he recruits, can bring in student athletes and obviously their families, that they understand that he truly does care about them as people first, and then certainly wants them to maximize their opportunity from a football standpoint. And to do that, in addition to developing individually, winning comes along with that. And so, I'm confident in his vision and his plan. And for us, and again, it's not the same at every school, but when you look back historically with Indiana football, when we've had glimmers of hope where we're going to turn the corner, and we've had good seasons, we've had really good players, I think we've had a type of coach here who is just like Tom, like a Bill Mowry, who really laid out a foundation here for Indiana football of how we do things. And so Tom is building on that. And, I've got all the confidence in the world that Tom's going to continue to recruit the type of student athletes who want to play here, that can maximize their opportunity both as an individual and for the team.
Well, standing back from afar and watching his work, it's hard not to pull for him as somebody who doesn't have necessarily anything invested in your success, but certainly wants you to be successful. But I don't know Tom, but I watching him and how he runs his program was an encouragement to me over these last couple of years, because I see the things you're talking about him when you talk about the kind of leadership you want around your program, and people are important to leading you to future success. So that's good stuff. Hey, so look, you're not going to believe this, but we're out of time, and I'm sure it's so disappointing to find out that we're not going to be able to
talk about I could talk all day
about portal and collectives and the pandemic and whatever else that we could talk about. Maybe I'll invite you back for a second session on that, and you'll decline that one probably. But
no, I'd love to. I'd love to.
It's been great to have you on today, Scott, and I really appreciate you spending some time with us.
Well, Mike, I can't thank you enough, and I definitely look forward to getting together with you sometime offline, because I love to pick your brain, and I followed you from a distance and just really appreciate all that you've done for college athletics and kind of paving the way for future athletic directors like me. So I enjoyed talking to you, and as I said, keep in touch. I'd love to get together with you again at some point.
I'm going to get to Assembly Hall at some point, maybe this fall. That'd be great. So,
Hey, you've got an open invitation, no question about it.
Okay. All right. All right, folks. Thanks for joining us today. My guest has been Scott Dolson, who is the Director of Athletics at Indiana University. Great conversation. We appreciate his time. This has been From the Chair. I'm Mike Hamilton. We'll see you next time.